When last we met, I had finished drawing the southern facade of the White House, and as charming as this is, it needs landscaping. This is Kerwalner. I begin my landscaping from left to right, like everything else, so we were beginning with the rose garden and drawing in all the hedges to be found there. After I get those out of the way, I have to draw the huge magnolia trees that are in front of the west side. I look for a picture that shows the trees as best as possible, and I found this fantastic picture of both the trees on the left side and on the east side that was taken during this year's Easter egg roll at the White House. So I grid that off, and then I make a grid that is the size that I want the tree to be in the drawing, and I slip that grid underneath. And for each square in the grid, I look at the picture and then I draw it in as best I can. And eventually you, with enough determination, you get the whole thing done. So that is how I'm proceeding with the landscaping. Once the west side is done with all of its hedges and so on, I can move over to the east side, and under the trees over there are this bed of tulips, which takes some time putting in there. The problem with my scrap picture of the magnolia trees is that it stops eventually, and I run out of scrap picture to work with. So I find myself a farther off version of the picture that shows me the shape of the overall tree, and I extrapolate the rest. I've been doing this long enough that I can kind of make it up creditably. The next thing to go in is the driveway, which is, in my series of drawings here, I'm using the same formula for the asphalt each time, swirling in a nice little gray pen. South lawn is interesting because it's divided up into 25 little stripes. So I have to project that out from the vanishing point and make sure that I get all of that in. So now we have a landscaping but no White House. I begin inking the White House with the most challenging thing there, which is the stairs. The balustrades of the stairs, I have to look forward and make sure that I am drawing the proper number of balustrades in each one of these handrails. And then the ground floor blocks, it's sort of a V shape in between each one of the blocks, and I don't have enough room to put in 3 lines, so 2 is going to have to do, and I'm going to have to do the rest of it with shading. And then the ground floor windows, of course, underneath the trees. I simply adore drawing these windows. It is almost reflexively. I could practically do this in my sleep by now because there's like a certain mathematical proportion to each one of them. So as you can see, I'm working from left to right and from the bottom to the top. So that means our next stop is the first floor window frame, which are, again, I'm beginning to become more comfortable with doing these, but consistency is the key, especially with the blue rooms, the ones that are on the east side of the bulge and the west side of the bulge. They were too narrow, so I had to draw them over again. Now we move on to the entablature, which is a series of very thin horizontal lines, followed by working with the larger dentals, which is another exercise in trying to make everything consistent. And then above that are the balustrades. And the balustrades are tricky. Since the balusters in the balustrade are round, I can just draw a template of one of them and move it from piece to piece and trace them, which will give me a consistency that I'm looking for. And after that, the whole White House is now inked. So we can move on to the shading. By referencing the gray shades in my overview drawing, I can kind of get an idea of where I ought to be in the shading of this new piece. So I give everything a once over, except for where the highlights are. And then I go in and, with the same gray, deepen the shadows under the Truman balcony and under the entablature on the south colonnade. Now that I have the big surfaces shaded the way that I want them to be, I can go in and start detailing the shading. We start off with the ground floor windows, of course, and we move on to the coloring in the stairs and the blocks on the ground floor. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but the way that the blocks turn as they relate to the sun has everything to do with how you perceive this whole thing as being a rounded shape that's sticking out toward the viewer. So it's very important to get that all right. Oh, the potted plants and the surface of what they call the South Plaza, and then the red carpet that sticks out from the diplomatic reception room entrance. Then we move on to the first floor window frames and the shading of the curtains and the reflections of things in the windows, which is always interesting. So after getting all the first floor windows in, this is all beginning to look pretty well. After doing the shading on the column bases, we move on to the shading of the second floor windows and the reflection of the second floor windows, and then we shade all of the capitals, both the pilasters and the rounded columns. You do all of them at the same time so that there's a chance that they'll all turn out kind of consistently. Speaking of consistent, that's what you have to be with the entablature, which is all of the stuff above the capitals. Because of my technique of putting in just the basic shading of the shape of the colonnade and everything, that covers the multitude of it, but then there's the detailing that has to be done, and there's all of these horizontal cuts in the design that throw shadows and make it interesting, and highlights and so on. And after you get done with all of that, then you get to tackle the spaces, all of the shading around the dentals, which is another exercise in frustration because you have to be consistent with each space within the context of like whether that space is facing the light or whether it's facing shadow. So you have to remember where you are with the whole thing. That holds doubly true for the balustrades. The balustrade on the east side of the South Facade is blocked with a privacy screen, I guess. Nothing shows through those balustrades, but things show through the other ones, so you have to remember what shows through and how the light is striking these round balusters. So, after many months, we finally finished the south side of the White House, and thank goodness. So that means that we have to select our next drawing, and for that I have our special guest, David Coons, here with me today. David and I met because David he's the kind of person that every artist ought to know. He's the mad computer genius, and what he doesn't know about color photography and reproducing artwork in prints is just not worth knowing. David produces reproductions of my artwork that is just spot on. It's just amazing, and he's very tweaky and diligent about everything, so I appreciate everything that you bring to the table, David.
I love your drawings. They're incredible. I love what you said about the original drawing we did of the house in Venice. and that how the reproduction would be of better quality than the original, because the original fades and is water soluble and is wrinkled and it's taped together, and the print is this perfect rendition that will never fade.
Yeah, it's true. Anyway, I've asked David to come up and help me select the subject for the next White House drawing, and I've only got about 4 or 5 of them left, so he's going to have to be very careful about mixing these things up. So he's going to pick the next subject for the drawings. So mix those up a little bit and pick one.
This is an onerous responsibility.
Heavy responsibility.
Right, in the true interest of randomness.
Good. I am a big place. Now this is going to be a cross-section diagram of the residence and some of the wings. And I'm very anxious to get started with that. All right. If you're enjoying these videos, please subscribe to the channel if you would. Until next time, bye-bye.